tutorial. This one we're going to look at the Bloodsecrator of Khorne, and I'm using all contrast paints here. I do use a little bit of layer paints at the very end just to touch things up and add it to the next level. Just as a hint, I'm basically following the guide in the Citadel Paint app and trying things out. So first off, putting on some of this, the undead horde or whatever, the skeleton, the skull paint here on all the skull bits, and then doing some Guilliman Flesh on all the flesh areas. And I've undercoated with the Grayseer primer. I figured doing it a bit of a darker tone or a cool tone made sense for Khorne. And the only other thing I didn't follow with the paint app was I used Blood Angel's Red instead of the Khorne Red. So putting on the Aggros Dunes for all of the non-metallic sort of bronze looks, and I'm really happy with how this turns out. Basically able to paint this on one layer, and it did a slight bit of edge highlighting. Gets to a really great tabletop level, and I'm pretty happy with that in terms of a easy non-metallic look. Putting on the black for some of his pants and a couple of the hair details. I think one of the key things with contrast paints is the Citadel handle, or something similar, like using a cork or an old paint bottle with some blue tack. Really necessary because it takes so long for this to dry, and I like to use my pinky finger to sort of brace my paint hand, as you can see there. If I'm holding just the base, then I tend to put my finger on the model, and if the contrast paints are still wet, then it messes everything up. So doing the Basilicanum Grey on all of the silver bits. So this is again non-metallic. I'm going to highlight this with Administratum Grey, sort of edge highlighting to make it look a little bit better. Not totally necessary, and I had to retouch up some of those spikes there because I painted them. I thought they were going to be the gold or the bronze color. So every once in a while, in between these coats, I do touch up some of the base contrast colors, the base color, the Grayseer, just to touch up any areas where I kind of painted outside the lines. Here I'm painting on the Blood Angel's Red on all of the armor bits, and really like how bright this comes out. However, once I move over to the his big banner thing there, it becomes really hard to get in sort of the cracks without going outside the line. So I use a very fine brush. And when doing that, I don't get the full benefit of the contrast because it takes so long to do things. It doesn't really flow greatly. So I do go back later, and you'll see touching up some highlights. So going here with Snakebite Leather, getting all of the trim bits, the leather bits. Really like how this goes on. And again, had to touch up some of the areas there. This is all the contrast done. And now I'm going in with some layer paints and just adding a little bit more level. So if you look at the Citadel Paint app, you go into the contrast option for different models that are available. They go all the way up to a contrast level, so to get you battle ready, I think they call it, which is kind of your tabletop standard, and then you can go to sort of parade ground, which is the next level, using the layer paints. And so what I've done is I've picked a couple layer paints here. So Ushabti Bone, some of the skulls there, because I painted them very early on in the steps, I got some of the other colors on bits of them, and so this is just touching all of that up. And what this allows me to do is sort of touch up any of the areas I messed up by painting outside of the lines with the other colors. And it kind of matches the same tones as the contrast colors, so it's really handy for touching things up, because you don't really want to go back and redo all the contrast on the one area, because then you'll end up with like tied lines where you painted the next layer of contrast over top, and it won't look good. So here I am with the gray, or done now, just doing some of the edge highlights here, very, very fine edge highlights. So the Screaming Skull goes on the skulls as well as the brass, and just very little bits on the brass, just trying to get some of the main super edge highlights, the top edges here. And you can see some of the pooling on those top levels there isn't perfect. So if you wanted to touch this up to another level, you could redo that a little bit with the layer paints. But overall, really happy with how this model turned out. Contrast paints, really enjoying it. It's a bit of a different technique for me. You have to really try to stay in the lines. So using that Citadel paint handle is handy for me, just to help keep my thumb or my fingers out of the model. Anyways, if you want to see more, check out my channel, subscribe, and leave a comment to tell me what you'd like to see next. Hope you enjoyed this. See you next time.